Design and Technology program, although I've taught undergraduate courses. I've taught, I'm going to move around and make Ralph crazy.
No, it's all good.
I've taught in the transdisciplinary design program. I've taught in the photography program. I've taught media studies. I have been teaching here for 21 years. Take one off the top and pass it on down. So yeah, it's been a long time. That's why I'm 85 years old. And how does this system work? What are we doing over here? I've only used that thing. This one certainly has a freestanding cable.
It's in the
What's
this
wrong
side.
left?
This side.
This
Left
side?
side.
Yeah, left.
See, now I get to see it how, when you guys are presenting, oh my God, you really have to like get back here, huh?
Need some help?
Oh, I think I got it. When you guys are presenting for your classes, you have to like struggle with the technology, and I'm like, you should be prepared, you should come early. See, look who doesn't do that. The worst example. I gave a talk at USC a couple of years ago, and there were all these wires along the ground. And I didn't trip, but I electrocuted myself. And my shoe caught on fire. Let's hope that doesn't happen here, even though this cord looks really suspect. Seems like it's turning on. It's Friday! Yay! So I think all we need to do here is an input situation. Aha!
Has anyone not gotten a card yet?
We have extra copies.
Oh, yes. Oh, good. I want to talk about this one. Does the game club have the new one? All right, I've got a gift for the game club. This is the benefit of having a physical thing that you've made, is that you always have a present for somebody. It's like, what am I going to bring? You know, when you travel to visit people, or you know, you get to do stuff, you should bring a gift. Here is a sneak peek of an upcoming image for the metagame website. I actually baked a pumpkin pie for this photograph, and I, opened a can of cranberry sauce. In some of the other photos, you see the meal I created, which was like, let's see, no, I don't see it. Over here, half-eaten Brussels sprouts and mashed potatoes. A window into what I'm working on today. That is what that was. Okay, so I don't want a free keynote update. All right. So this is my attempt at vaporwave art. How many of you guys know vaporwave? Yes? Okay. All right. The rest of you are going to have to quickly Google it because it's a pretty interesting phenomenon. I'm kind of obsessed with it lately, trying to figure it out. It goes alongside sea-punk, which my hair was accidentally colored pink, and now I'm kind of sea-punk. And also, so this is the worst nightmare, right? It's like someone in their mid-40s talking to you about like the stuff the cool kids are doing. I'm just basically trying to kill cool stuff. But yeah, this is my vaporwave introduction here. I was introduced to it about 10 days ago. I was staying with my friend Richard, who, if I want to name drop, is Richard Lamartian, the lead designer for the Uncharted series. And we were hanging out, and Richard always shows me cool stuff. We're about the same age, but we both like to be in touch and stuff. and he showed me some vaporwave stuff. It was really cool. That's also my Twitter handle and my Instagram handle, my email address at Gmail. So now you know how to get in touch with me. That's the point of putting that there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff I've done and a lot of the failures I've had in my career. Give you a little sense of how I got into games. We're going to play. We're going to do interstitial gameplay. And then we're just going to hang out and you guys can ask me questions, or we can play some metagame, or do whatever you want. I'll try not to go on too long. I put that in for another talk I was giving, but how many of you have heard of Riot Games, the company? Okay, here's the really funny thing. I was asked to give a talk there 2 weeks ago, and I didn't know who they were. I'd never played League of Legends. I knew about League of Legends, I knew that this game existed, and I was like, that's not the kind of game I like, so I am not even going to touch it because it's super hyper competitive and just seems like it would be too much to sit down and learn and spend too much time doing. But despite that, and after Google searching, I was like, oh, they made League of Legends. Oh, they're the one in Santa Monica. Okay, I think I know who this is. I went and gave a talk there and admitted all of these things to them. And they were cool with it, which is really nice. But I re-gave a talk that I gave at the Women in Games Luncheon at the Game Developers Conference a year ago, which that's a conference that is really big. There's like 30,000 game developers there present. It costs about $4,000 to attend, unless you're giving a talk. And if you're giving a talk, then it's free. So I only go when I can get there for free. Parsons does not want to pay $4,000 for me to go to a conference. You'd be happy to know that, because it's your hard-earned tuition money. But I gave a talk about the imposter syndrome. Have you guys heard of this before, the imposter syndrome? So like, how many of you have experienced imposters? Let me tell you what it is if you're not sure, and then you can, maybe more people will raise their hand. So imposter syndrome is this feeling you get when you have a position of, like at a job, mostly, and you're like, gosh, I'm so lucky. Like, I really don't deserve this. I have no idea why I'm here. I'm not as smart as the rest of the people in this room. I've experienced that most of my life. And despite my outward confidence, I oftentimes question, like, what am I doing here? I should question, why did Riot Games ask me to give a talk there if I don't even know who they are? And it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with, particularly women. It's the psychologist who named the term imposter syndrome found it quite often in professional women who were kind of very high achieving. So that's the good news, is that it means you're high achieving. But it's very real, and it can impact your ability to succeed as much as you could, right? It impacts your ability to do things like, raise your hand and speak up in meetings, or ask for a raise or a promotion, or seek out more challenges. So it's something I have struggled with most of my career. I became director of the graduate program when I was in my late 20s. I felt like I wasn't that much older than most of the students, and I was like, what am I doing here? And the faculty were just so smart, and I would call meetings, and I'd just be like scared to say anything, but I think I did a pretty okay job in the end. But I was always, it's why I have gray hair. I was always really stressed out. That's my confession to you tonight. I usually don't say this at the beginning of classes and stuff like that, but it is real. It's something that I think most people experience, and I think probably a lot of Parsons students do, because you guys are high achieving. You work hard, and you get placed into positions that are real, that are big, you know, when you go out into the workforce. So, how many of you felt imposter syndrome? Were there more hands? Yeah, okay, all right, yeah. So anyway, someday I can give that talk, but I'm not going to give it today. So this is, how many of you have seen one of these before? Yeah. Oh, gee. Okay. How many of you have touched one of these before? Oh, wow. Okay. How many of you have gotten blisters by typing on the keyboard of one of these before? All right, I have. It's like, it's a membrane keyboard. It's a terrible design, and actually it's kind of like if you've ever taken guitar lessons, you end up getting calluses and blisters. The reason I got blisters was not playing Centipede necessarily, but was because this Atari 400, which was an early computer that you would hook up to your television set, came with a BASIC cartridge. BASIC was an early programming language. It was very basic. Not in that way, but simple. And it was my first introduction to like actually making stuff on computers. And I was about 9 years old. And here's how you learned how to make games when you were 9 years old in 1979 or 8, something. You guys are all calculating my age. It was 79. 2015. I am 45. You would learn how to make a video game then. You didn't have the internet. Well, some people did, but very few did. My aunt worked for digital, and she did have the internet. She would bring this typewriter to my house. This was my first fascination with games. She'd bring this typewriter, and it had 2 suction cups on it. She would put the telephone on the suction cups, and then she would dial the mainframe where she worked, which was this company digital, and we played this text-based adventure called an Advent or Adventure, and it was the first, one of the first, it was the first. And I became obsessed, and it all printed out. It didn't have a screen. There was no screen on this thing. It was like a typewriter was typing back to you, and then you would type into it, and then it would type stuff back to you. It was like magic. And then you could save it and like reread it, and then be like, oh, I should have chosen this, and you could draw on it, you could do all kinds of stuff. Anyway, I wanted to make those kinds of games, text-based adventure games. So I subscribed to a magazine. I don't even remember the name. It was like Computer Enthusiast or something like that. And in that magazine, they would have basic programs for games. This is how you got games, indie games, outside of buying the Centipede cartridge. So you could actually open up this magazine, look at the text, at the text, which was code, basic code, and you could type it on your thing, your computer, whatever it might have been. And then you would press run, and it would work. And you realize, oh, I misspelled this, I forgot to put in this thing, there's some of these things, these parentheses I forgot to do. You know, as a kid I didn't know what they were, but they were like the things. And finally, you would press run, and it would work. And you would have this cool game you could play. But not only that, you could go in, you could change the names of the characters in the game. If it had graphics, you could change the graphics. You could change the sounds and learn how sound was made. And basically make the game your own. Ah, the good old days. But people like John Romero, who created Doom and a bunch of other great games, used to do just that, used to publish his games in magazines. And that's kind of how it worked. That was the early internet. I have another theory about cousins being the early internet, but I'll tell you that later. I'm curious. And then Pilot was another language that I had I still have all these things and this system. And it was more about plotting and making graphics. So that was really cool. It was like Illustrator, but with code. Like processing. I just realized that, you guys. So those are that's my origin story. And then when I turned 12, I realized the only other people doing this kind of thing were other boys. And I grew up like as a boy basically and played with the other boys in the neighborhood. And I remember my first day of Catholic school, one of my friends went home to their mother and said, "Colleen's a girl?" Because I had to wear a girl outfit. It was horrible. But then when I turned 12, I started to feel a little weird hanging out with just the boys, and there was a lot of peer pressure to be cool and to like, Duran Duran or whatever. And so I stopped. I stopped making games and I kind of put it aside. Sadly, I think that if things had gone differently, I would be John Romero now and have billions of dollars. That's okay. Because I'm back in games. But yeah, as a kid, that was what I wanted to do. Then I went to art school. So this is a photograph of me and my car, and sort of indicative of the stuff I was doing at the time as a young art undergraduate student at Pratt Institute. So I moved here when I turned 18 and started going to art school. I'm from Ohio, as you can see from the picture. That is a '66 Buick Wildcat. And started to really think about imagery and representation and gender and all of this kind of stuff. I didn't really know I was doing that. I think in retrospect, you learn more about yourself than you knew when you were there. And then I graduated, I got a job in advertising. Because I could, do photography, I could make art, and I was kind of into this computer thing still. Actually, there's about 2 years in between graduating and getting this ad job where I was like working at a bookstore, and I was the computer supervisor at the bookstore ultimately. I did receiving first, and I did the cash register. I did all these different jobs there, but then I learned that I really liked the computer there, and so I became a computer person, and then I saved up, bought a computer, learned computers, and like you did back then, and then got this job in advertising. It was the early days of the internet. It was the 90s, and this is my first publicly released game. The one I made when I was 9 about Jacques Cousteau and finding the undersea alien stronghold, I guess you would call it, or alien spaceship. Never got released. So this is my first game. It was a game for Midori, which is anybody had this? Who's had Midori? Anybody? Okay, don't. It's a melon-flavored liqueur, and it's bright green. So if you've had any weird green drinks, it's probably got some Midori in it. And it was a Flash-based game. I don't know if people still even know what Flash is these days.
It's pretty much getting abandoned.
It's kind of gone, right? But back then it was just starting. It wasn't even called Flash. It was called Shockwave. No, it was even before that.
Or Shockwave.
Yes.
Future Splash. Yeah.
Future Splash.
Wow.
Yes. We were there. So yeah, and I got asked to do the programming for this. Actually, the art was not mine. The art was another illustrator we were working with. But I doubt you can find this. Maybe the Wayback Machine, you can find this game, and it won't work. But basically, it's not really a game because you can mix anything with Midori and it's just fine. Even milk and orange juice and Midori. I would just recommend you don't put Midori into the mixers and just drink the mixers. And it was okay. But it had a little shake effect and like some sound effects and some stuff. And for me, that was it. I was like, oh wow, this is really cool. But at the same time, I was doing visuals at rave parties. So at night, I met this guy at the bookstore I was working at, and he introduced me to this sort of burgeoning intellectual rave scene in the city in like the mid-90s. And the first thing I did visuals for was at this place called the Knitting Factor, at the Kitchen, which was a performance and art space. And so I made this little sort of video loop on my computer and just showed it. But then I started to build tools to mix videos and visuals. These are all video clips. I wish I had the full motion video. I'll try to find it. It might be on my website, but this is even a chrome poodle that I modeled in Form Z and animated with some other old tool, I'm not even sure what. I would do a lot of things where I'd map stuff onto three-dimensional shapes using something called VRML, Virtual Reality Modeling Language, which maybe should have a resurgence now with Oculus. There's a DJ in front of some of the visuals. I just heard someone named Susboy speak a few weeks ago, who's also a video artist, and now I guess you can make lots of money doing this. I made no money doing this. It was just because I loved learning, and this was a great opportunity to learn really quickly and rapidly and iterate. Try one thing, see what people thought. You'd get immediate feedback. And you try something the next week. And so I did this thing called Sound Lab, which was every Friday night in this old rickety walk-up on Walker Street down in Chinatown. And people like BJ Spooky would play, and Soul Slinger, and I don't know if these people make any sense. Goldie played some of them, we did, and it was great because I was introduced to this music that I thought was really interesting, but also other visual artists, and we would share tips and techniques. And so I just got better because I was practicing this thing on a weekly basis. And then I moved to Kuala Lumpur. I didn't move to this building. This is a prison in Kuala Lumpur named Pudu Prison. It's since been demolished, I believe. Kuala Lumpur, I was asked to go there. I was teaching part-time at Parsons. So I had started teaching part-time at Parsons at this point. I taught an early game design class using a weird tool called Mtropolis, which isn't used. It was bought by Adobe Macromedia at the time, and then Adobe, and killed. Just like a lot of software gets killed by the competition that's bigger. It's like big fish eating little fish. But I was asked to go to Kuala Lumpur and help start an affiliate school for Parsons. And I was young adjunct faculty teaching part-time. And I was like, wow, this could be a full-time job. This could be great. Because I was working at the ad agency. And I was kind of semi-full-time. I was teaching at a corporate branding place called Donovan and Green. I was teaching at Pratt. And I was teaching at Parsons. So I had like all these jobs strung together, and then I was up all night at these rave parties. And I was like, wow, I think it would be good for me to go do one job. So I agreed, and they said, okay, you have to be ready in 2 weeks and go. And I was like, and I soon met some interesting artists and people there, architects, set designers. And we started to throw these rave parties there. I was like, hey, well, this is kind of boring. People here just go out to dinner and go to a bar, and go, where do you go dancing? And the dance clubs were kind of really cheesy. I was like, well, we should do these site-specific rave parties, and we can do it. We can put on this show ourselves. And so we started doing different events and parties, and we ultimately only did about 3 parties of any significance. Some smaller ones. One was in a bungalow, then one was on top of a skyscraper on a helicopter landing pad. and then finally this event at Voodoo Prison. And at this event, 4,000 people came. We probably sent about 30 faxes. Back then, we sent faxes. And 4,000 people came. That was how that happened. We ended up getting into some trouble. This was an abandoned prison at the time. We did get permission from the property owner to do the event on the site. We kind of did everything we needed to, we thought. We invited artists to do installations in about 50 of the cells. Some people had been in prison in Malaysia, so it was interesting. They came back to prison and made art. The local chapter of Amnesty International wrote a piece that said that this was a terrible, terrible thing. That we were having a rave party in this site where people had been tortured and killed and, didn't have a very good time, but we were having a good time in this space. And it was a really interesting moment for me, thinking about the politics of what I do and being confronted with that. And I had been thinking somewhat politically, we were like, yeah, let's get artists to come to these cells. One has been in prison about 30 different times. And I was in Kuala Lumpur a little less than a year ago, and I was hanging out with him. And he just got paid a few million ringgit, the local currency, which is almost $1 million, because he'd been in prison so many times, kind of wrongfully. So, yes. But he did a piece in one of the cells. Anyway, I digress. But this is kind of what I spent time doing, and I started thinking politically a little bit. I disagree with the people who were against this event. I think that this event brought some of these issues to people who wouldn't be thinking about them, the club crowd. But it's okay, we can agree to disagree. And then I came back to New York and I met these two people. This is Katie Salen and this is Eric Zimmerman. Eric and I have a company together right now. We made the metagame together, and soon we're going to play a little version of it. Katie was here for quite some time and was the director of the MFADT program for a while. And, both of them wrote a great book called Rules of Play, which if you're interested in games, you have to read it. It's a big book, so just get it and open it to random pages, and lots of knowledge will go right into your head. It's incredible. But I met them and I had really not thought about games since my little forays into them in the past. And I was like, wow, these guys are cool. And they're making games, and they're not the kinds of games that I thought were games, right? These days, it's like, if people hear a video game, they think Call of Duty, right? Which is not a bad game. It's just that's what you think when you think video game industry. But I realized, wow, you could do different stuff through them. And pretty much everything I've ever done in my life is because I meet people who are really interesting. And they teach me something. They show me a world. And I would just say, this is a great place for you guys to be, because you're also meeting people and they're showing you different kinds of worlds, different ways to be, different ideas. So Katie and I started this thing called Pet Lab. And we make a bunch of different projects there. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about them, because I'm sure you can learn about them at some point. This is also my pet lab. Iggy Pup. We named Pet Lab because I have a pet lab, but also then we had to think of what it meant, and we decided it means the Prototyping Education and Technology Lab. So it's really about Iggy Pup. And then I have a company called Local Number 12 with John Sharp, who also teaches here, and Eric Zimmerman, who teaches at the NYU Game Center. We just spend about 5 hours together. We meet on Fridays, and we want to punch each other. So we made this game, the metagame. This is the first edition. This is the video game edition. In fact, this is out of print, and could be worth something someday. Who knows? So thanks for giving it back to me. I'm just kidding. And this one's a card game about video games, and we made it for the Game Developers Conference. So that's a little scary. It's like going to the chef's convention and being asked to cook dinner. for everybody. It's like, well, this better be good. Luckily, Eric had made some of those kinds of games before, and we had made a game for the conference a year earlier called Back Chatter, which has you making bets on the Twitter feed. So you bet on what words are gonna like be buzzwords. So we made this game, and basically this game is based on what people do there anyway. They debate the merits of different video games. They're like, okay, yeah, which game has a better story? Super Mario or Final Fantasy X? Obviously Super Mario.
Whoa.
I knew that would be
Don't
controversial.
start this debate.
I knew that would be controversial. Yeah, or you know, which is faster, which goes better with a hot dog and a beer, Flight Simulator or Halo. And we made it as a collectible card game, so you would be given a little mini deck of 6 cards at the conference, and then you would find other people, and you'd be like, I challenge you, which goes better with a hot dog and a beer? I think it's Flight Simulator, and then they look in their deck and they're like, no, it's Beer Tapper, you know, and then there's an argument. And then people who are standing around them, listening, vote on who wins. And if you win, you get to take one of those person's cards. If you recruit more members into the game by taking them to the International Game Developers Association booth on EGA, then you can get more cards. So what we tried to do was create a kind of viral game so it would spread, and an economy of cards that people would want to collect. And in the end, if you collected a certain amount of cards with little stars on them, you could be in the tournament at the end that was judged by John Romero and, you know, other people like that. And it did really well. We were really happy. About 4,000 people played. You know, out of 30,000, that's not everybody, but it was a pretty solid number of players. And we, right then, right there, in our hotel room, made a video, that sounds weird, and made a Kickstarter campaign, for our Kickstarter campaign, for this game. And we launched the Kickstarter right there at GDC, and that is what funded the creation of this deck that you can get at home and play with family and friends. But now the version of the game is more like this, and some of you have these cards in your hands. I always like to kind of take this is my litmus test. How many do you think Pride and Prejudice feels like First Love? Raise your hands. How about any Journey album?
Closer, I was going to those.
And then everybody else thinks this is a really dumb set of cards. Okay, that's fine. The thing about the metagame that I really